Tim Zhu, and then Saz is back, and then Joni Johnson-Powe. She has over 20 years of tax accounting and consulting experience, providing clients with tax compliance and consulting services, including income, sales and use, VAT, property, unclaimed, basically everything tax. It looks like she has both industry and public accounting experience with Big Four firms and large national firms. So Joni, I'll let you take it away.
Great, thanks. Thanks, John. So yeah, we have a great topic to talk about today. We also, we really want to talk a little bit about, how companies are utilizing data analytics in their day-to-day business. So with further ado, I'd really like to just start out with our panelists and have each of you tell a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today. And then we'll jump into the topic of technology and analytics in your day-to-day business. So Tim, how about you get us kicked off today?
Yeah, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining. So my name is Tim Zhu. I'm the CFO, Executive Vice President and CFO for the Boston Red Sox. And I've been with the Red Sox for 18 years. I started in 2003. My career journey, I'll give you the condensed version. Grew up in Boston, a long-time Boston sports fan, huge Red Sox fan. Went to MIT, actually studied mechanical engineering, so not sort of a finance major. Worked at Bain & Company as a consultant for a couple of years. Actually taught 8th grade math for 4 years in the Boston public school systems, and then landed at the Red Sox as an unpaid summer intern in the summer of 2003. So one of the benefits of teaching is you have the summers off, and I was able to get an internship with the Red Sox, thinking at the time it would just be a sort of 2-month thing to do. But I found I loved it. I sort of loved everything about it. I loved working, passionate about sports and baseball. Loved the idea of sort of helping the Red Sox off the field win the next World Series, which at the time in 2003, they hadn't won in 85 years. And so I joined full-time in 2004 as a business analyst. I'd like to say that I was the reason they won the World Series in 2004, because that was my first year as well. Me and David Ortiz were new recruits, I guess, around that time. And I've been there ever since. So I've been there for the last 18 years in sort of in a business analyst role, which is really more of a sort of internal consultant type role and looking at data analytics for the first half of my career. And for the last 5 years, I've been CFO, overseeing the finance department, business analytics, and as well as our IT and technology. So that's the shortened version. Thrilled to be here. Thanks everybody for having me.
Great. I think we're going to have a poll come up real quick. So I didn't want to interrupt you, Saf, but Saf, why don't you also just kind of give us a quick overview of your background, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So I think some of you already know me from the prior session, but just to give a quick background on me, I've Tim, I'm also an engineer. I'm an electrical engineer. So I don't know. I think it's a coincidence that both of us are engineers. Not a lot of CFOs are, but when I was deciding to go to school, part of the family said, be an accountant. Accountants can do anything, and the rest of the family said, be an engineer. So I kind of did a double major to cover my bases. And however, I did not grow up in the finance field. I have been in sales. I've been in marketing. I've been general manager at businesses. I actually became a CEO in 2 instances before I became a CFO. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to become a CFO, because as a CEO, I had a lot of questions that my CFOs could not answer. So that kind of, I think, brings me back to the analytics piece I'm extremely curious. I want to understand the cause effect of what is happening in the business, and so it's been a lifelong pursuit of the truth. So that's where I have a passion about the analytics and going from data to information that can inform us. I also sit on a few boards, so also look at businesses in a boundaryless manner across different functional silos. So not just finance, but across the business.
Well, I think that's a good segue too. As you mentioned, those questions that you weren't able to answer or get in as a CEO. But let's jump to this poll question real quick, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that. So our first poll question is, how big is your company? Yeah. And so the answers we have here: 0 to 50, 51 to 100, 100 to 300, 300 to 1,000, or 1,000 plus. So we will allow everybody to get their answer into the poll, and then we'll share the results with all of the participants. So it looks like 46% of you are in 0 to 50, so some smaller companies, but then we do have quite a few, 39% with 1,000 plus, and then a little bit of mixture in between. So that's great to know. That's great. Okay, so Seth, you mentioned that, as a CEO, you really wanted to, you had a lot of questions that you weren't getting the answers to, which kind of guided you into wanting to be a CFO. Can you elaborate on what kind of questions does data really play in your day-to-day business, and why is it so important to have that data as part of your day-to-day operations in your company?
Sure. If you think about, the traditional reporting mechanisms, they're all backward looking, right? They're all analyzing activities or things that have already happened. I heard someone say, bayoneting a cadaver. It's dead already, right? So you're basically just analyzing. And my questions were always about what will happen, at the current pace, or and how can I influence that, right? Because what has happened, no one can change that anymore. But pretty much the entire reporting mechanism in an organization is based on that. We should be informed by the past, but what I wanted was decision support in terms of what are the paths forward and what are the implications of each of those paths forward. And in a little bit, I'll talk a little bit more about I have an approach to budgets, right, where what we want to understand also are what are the dependent variables versus the ones that we can control, right? So for example, many companies, there are lots of methods around zero-based budgets and this and that. I follow a revenue-based budget because that actually is the key driver to everything else within an organization, right? And that's where many companies I worked for, and this is a big measure for the effectiveness of analytics, is how accurate are your revenue forecasts? And I believe 40% of companies actually have a variance of more than 7% on their revenue forecasts, right? So just imagine if you did that, everything else is all dependent on that, right? So those were some of the things, where I wanted to understand what is about to happen and how can we control that, and then everything else that falls behind that.
Great. Tim, you've got a unique background in terms of how you use data. Can you share that with the audience, kind of how data and analytics become an important part of what you do there at the Red Sox?
Yeah, and I'm going to sort of share a few slides throughout the way, and I'll pull them up and pull them down just to help answer some of these questions. So for that one, I'm going to just bear with me here for a second. I'll just throw this up, because I think this is helpful to understand the journey that sort of we've been on at the Red Sox. And what you see here is really three phases of our development of analytics and use of analytics. So from 2003, when I started, to 2012, the person is me. This is the sort of size of our business analytics department. And the reason I put this up is, to Sass's point, it was a lot of historical look back. It was, we did some efficiency on ticket pricing. We did some database management. We did some sort of efficiency. When we entered into phase 2, that was really all about the customer, talking about customer data and on our CRM strategy and our customer data warehouse strategy. And I can talk more about that later, but clearly understanding your customer and being able to serve them the right message to the right person at the right time is a really critical thing. And then in phase 3 and really moving forward, and like Sass said, is really looking forward, predictive modeling, machine learning, et cetera. So I just want to throw this up here quickly to say our journey has been about I'll bring it down, gathering information first, getting our hands on the data, making sense of that data, putting it in a format using business intelligence tool that allow these sort of key insights to jump off the page for actionable results. The customer is critical. So I think customer data is a massive part of what we've done. And I think forward-looking and predictive stuff is really important as well. So that's just sort of those categories that I wanted to set the table with, and sort of our philosophy of trying to use data in really all of our business decisions.
So that was a great slide that you shared, and it kind of showed the progression. Like, you don't often think of like a sports team having that kind of insight. How did you guys get from the point in 2003 there was like one person focused on it to where you guys are today? And what was important in terms of getting there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the constant theme was just demonstrating success, right? Demonstrating that the stuff that we were doing was working, was creating ROI, driving value. And every time we did a new project, we were sort of, delivered it to our CEO or whoever, and said, well, that's great, I want to do more. And then, just continuing to get top-down buy-in, because, buy-in to data and analytics is a philosophy that you need top-down support. You need your CEO to believe in it, and if your CEO doesn't believe in it, you're going to be facing an uphill battle to ask for resources. And, because these things have costs, the technology has costs, the people resources have costs, et cetera. So, I think that it's really top-down buy-in, but also demonstrating successes that can, show actionable ROI to what you're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really great point. So I'll present this question to both of you, and maybe Sass, I'll start with you. But what are the important sources of data that you rely on a day-to-day basis, and what tools help you with that? What tools are you using in part of that analysis from a analytics perspective?
Sure, and without getting into specific names of tools, I don't want I don't know who our sponsors are. I don't want to offend anyone or favor one versus the other, because I mean there are lots of really good tools, and most of them would work. It's I at least haven't come to the point where the limitation of a tool is the key limitation. It's the limitation of the design, right? I mean, it's usually the limitation of the design or the limitation of the availability of data. That's where I have seen the issues. But to answer your question more broadly, what traditional analytics has revolved around was a lot of the financial data, right? And I talked about cause effect in the past. So in many of my analytical projects, I usually try to understand the cause effect, and the financials are really a result of something else that's going on in the business upstream. So that's sort of where I start to say, how many transactions did we process, or how long did it take, how many people did we have that, and taking like a Lean Six Sigma type approach. So I always go back and start at the business level, and then understand what the implications of some of those upstream functions or actions are on the financials, right? Rather than trying to start with the result and saying, how do I change the result, right? So that's one aspect. The other aspect of this is many organizations, talk about having an integrated financial system and things like that, and this is where an approach I have followed is not all information is going to be in your ERP or in your financial system, right? So that's where using a data lake, right? A repository, right? Lack of a better term, a repository where you have where you have, I think we have another poll coming up. Joni.
Yeah, so let's jump into the poll real quick and we'll continue the discussion. Does your company have a dedicated business intelligence or data analytics department? Yes or no? I think one thing that we are seeing, I mean, even probably 3 or 4 years ago, there was a lot of these buzzwords around BI and data analytics, artificial intelligence. And I think the great thing that we're seeing now is that companies are deploying these, or it's not just kind of this buzzword anymore. So very interested to see what we have. So the results of the poll, 25% do have a BI or data analytics department, 75% do not. And I expect that, you know, in the coming years, we're going to see that yes percentage increase a lot. So Saf, why don't we continue?
Yeah, so and maybe I'll reflect on that. You know, I have maybe a bit of a contrarian view where, you know, I don't believe, you know, you need a dedicated analytics department. I think what we need to do is we need to move to every function delivering analytics, right? So at least when I organize my departments, Tim asked, you know, credibility with the CEO. I try to start with what are the key, you know, 5-10 things that the board and the executive team and the CEO needs to manage the company, to run the company, right? And
right.
then synthesize that down to where does that come from, right? Who's delivering those things? And some of them are in finance, some of them are in operations, some of them are in IT. But if you take that top-down approach, then what you see is, yeah, you can have an analytics, you know, department, dedicated analytics department, but they're only going to do exactly what they were doing before, which is you know, analyzing data that already exists instead of saying, how do I influence the metric, right? The goal is to influence the metrics, and this is where what I have always tried to do is push that down to operating departments where they are becoming more analytical, right? That they are not just transaction or paper pushers, but they are actually influencing the outcome rather than just measuring it.
Great. So Tim, I'd like to present to you, you know, how do you use the data in decision making on a day-to-day basis?
Apologies, guys. There might be a little loud. I think someone's mowing the lawn nearby, but I hope it doesn't affect the audio. It's the perils of working from home here. You know, I think just to look at the top customer data, and I'll throw up some slides again just to kind of hopefully frame that if you don't mind. You know,
Sure.
When we think about sort of customer data, I mean, first of all, I'll just back up and say, my whole career, I've tried to get my hands on every piece of data I can. You know, so I sort of believe that if you have a challenge, you have a business challenge, executive instincts and all of those are absolutely critical. But if you can gather data to help you support or oppose a hypothesis, it makes it sort of a lot easier. So I've always tried to get my hands on every possible data I can and use it to sort of help make decisions. On the customer side, that data is like gold, right? So I think that, you know, understanding your customers, we treat that like gold. And I have like 3 slides I just want to walk through to answer the question about the customer, which is, you know, most companies, this is just an example for Heinz, because I'm an enormously loyal customer of Heinz ketchup. They don't actually have a lot of direct contact with their customers. You know, Heinz is a product that's purchased in supermarkets. And so Heinz actually doesn't probably have a lot of opportunities to gather direct data from its customers. But if you think about a baseball team, and I won't read all of these, but baseball teams are lucky because we're selling tickets, we're selling concessions, we have a website, people can come take a tour, they can like us on Facebook, Twitter, they can get our emails. There's all these different connections that we have, and it's an opportunity for us to learn about our customers. And so we sort of created this customer data warehouse that basically took all of those interactions. They might have been in different systems, but put them into a single system, and then allows us to sort of pull insights and say, okay, well, these customers have this set of characteristics, they have this set of preferences, they might do this. And then we can use computers and machine learning to sort of create targeted messages that sort of are targeted to the different segments. So that's, you know, gathering the information is step 1. Step 2 is once you gather that information, which is sort of the left side of this slide, and we have a lot of different systems that you have to integrate, and there's a whole process of deduping the data and cleansing the data and all of that. But the output is on the right, which is you have this sort of very rich customer profile that your salespeople can use. It allows you to say, okay, this person is spending this much money. These are his likes. This is when he typically likes to go. And it, and again, it all comes down to what all these companies are doing when they're serving up ads, very, very sort of targeted and effectively. And so we've tried to do that on the journey as well. And I think, you end up with kind of this database where we can do, lots of different very, very targeted marketing that is critical. So on the customer side, I'll pull these down. Actually, sorry, the last thing is, the machine learning aspect of it is, I think, is really the next phase of this. So we are working with Google Cloud, and we're working with a company called Data Robot, and that's sort of the iterative part, right? So you sort of create campaigns, you test them, they work or they don't. The ones that work, you feed it back to the computer, you iterate on them, make them better. And that's really the exciting part. I'll pull this down again just to answer the question. So on the customer side, we try to get our hands on every single time a customer interacts with us, whether they're buying a ticket or they're buying a hot dog or they're liking a story on Facebook. We try to use that to better understand what their likes and dislikes are, so that we can serve them the right message at the right time. And we're on that journey, and we like to use baseball analogies. We're probably still in the third or fourth inning of that, of that journey on a 9-inning game. But it's an exciting thing that we think there's a lot of opportunity to use the technology resources to sort of, allow us to ultimately drive revenues.
Right. And I love that flow, that pictorial that you had that shows kind of that start where it's like, you got to pull the data, right? And a lot of companies are in different stages of kind of figuring out what that analytic process is going to look like. But understanding that, you have data in multiple places, right? You have data coming from multiple sources. And so you've got to consolidate and collate that data. But then another important part is data cleansing. Can you give a little bit of background on what happens in data cleansing and why it's important?
Yeah, well, I think what's critical is your data is only as useful as it is accurate, and so if you don't go through the process of cleansing it, and for us, we might have had John Smith exist in a ticket database, but a different John Smith might exist in, our sponsorship database or our concessions database. And if you're not thinking through thoughtfully merging those, if they do belong in the same record, then you can look at, okay, same address, same email address, same John Smith, probably the same John Smith. But maybe this John Smith is a different address and it's a different, you have to make sure that the cleansing part, which is, if it's an arduous process, to be honest, it's not easy. It's not necessarily fun. There's obviously software tools that can help, but you have to get that right, because if you're going to rely on the data to make actionable decisions, it has to be clean. It has to be accurate. And so I think it's such a fundamental step that you have to do on the front end if you're going to want to reap the benefits on the back end of, the insights that you hope to gain. And it is challenging and time consuming. And we've been on this journey for a long time. We do believe that we have the right tools in place to help us sort of make sure that that deduping process and those customer merge processes and all the things that you would want to do are done thoughtfully, but it is a challenge, and sometimes involves actually quite a bit of manual intervention, because sometimes the computer, you can trust the computers to be, helpful, but you also, sometimes they're not right. And so you have to sort of make sure that you have human intervention as well.
Right. And I think that's an important aspect, because, the computer may see insights or find data elements or factors that it thinks helps predict, right? Make that predictive analysis, but sometimes those elements are not actually relevant, or they may point to elements that you didn't realize were relevant, and maybe they are.
I think that's so true. And I'll give you an anecdotal, we could feed a computer our historical ticket data, and it can use all of that information to spit out a projected ticket price, but the computer doesn't know that we traded Mookie Betts, last off season. And like, how do you tell it things like that? Or the computer doesn't know that there's sentiment. So you have to make sure that you balance the data. I mean, I'm a huge believer in data, but I also am a huge believer that it can't be the only input in these decisions. You have to use it as a tool in your toolbox, but you have to balance it with sort of other, sort of gut instincts, feel, et cetera, and talking through the things before. You can't just let it drive every decision. And a lot of examples of that as well.
Yeah, great. Sas, can you tell us a little bit too about how, what's the process at York in terms of how you utilize that data to make decisions from a day-to-day perspective, and what have you learned in your journey from really implementing an analytics approach in multiple departments. And looks like we're going to have a third poll launch before we go into that. So where does this department, for those of you who have a business intelligence or data analytics, report up to? Does it report up to the finance group, information technology, or other, or not applicable? So there were some of you that do not currently have a department, and so you may be in the NA side of things, but yeah, it would be great to kind of see where that BI or data analytics group fits in within your organization. So we'll give it just a couple more minutes. And here we go. So 25% in finance, and surprisingly 11% not in information technology, and then 11% in other, but the majority in finance. So that's great. That's very interesting. Okay, Sass, back to you. So I just wanted to kind of hear about too your organization's journey into data analytics and how that rollout, rather not into having a department that provides that, but really empowering individual groups and departments to learn to utilize that data.
Sure. A lot of our journey has not just been about data empowering our decision making, but data that we process for our customers that we can enrich and turn around into decision support tools for them, right? So
Right.
for example, I mean, if you are processing a claim and really understanding. So for example, someone just from a health outcome perspective, for example, right? So someone who say a restaurant worker that had a laceration, and typically you'd think that, okay, just send them home, let that get dressed up and put a band-aid on and come back to work tomorrow. Except if they are a diabetic, or they had a high blood pressure or some other comorbidity, that could really become detrimental to them, as well as the overall value of the claim, right, for the company, for a workers' compensation claim. So that's kind of where what we do is we leverage multiple data sources to enrich that data to say, okay, here's what we need to do. And then, like I said, I'm all about influencing the outcomes. Why else do we want? It cannot be just idle curiosity. It's got to be meaningful. So yeah, if this person is a diabetic, then what we need to do is we probably need to immediately send them to an injury clinic and get that laceration stitched up, or give them an antibiotic, whatever those actions are, right? And how we look at that is, how long did it take for that worker to get back to work, right, from that injury? Yep. What was the total cost versus what could have been, right? And that's sort of information that we are bringing, not just from the specific transaction, but value adding that with additional information, right? Other things. Right. So, forensic data, for example, right? Someone files a claim, for a injury, but then you see that, there's social media feed where they're out at a nightclub, right? So obviously that's a fraudulent claim, right? That saves a lot of money for our customers. So that's kind of where our focus has been, to really harness the power of data. And this is something that we do, with years and years of past data, right? So this is where I'm going to just go back to the power of the history, because there are patterns. How much reserve do you build? How much, how long should a certain case take to get fixed? What should be the benchmark cost to treat? And throughout my history, when we were at Kaiser, I mean, this is way before ACA, right, where we were looking at episodic care, right, to say how much should whatever, right, a flu cost, right? In terms of what are the different
Mhm.
pathways to, so that's sort of where I would come
Mhm.
from, is how can we make the analytics actionable, where you
Right.
actually have a better outcome rather than just knowing, oh, okay, so this is what happened, right? That's great,
Mhm.
but then how do we use that to change the future?
Right. So you're really using that data to kind of predict, how that helps with your customer base, and then to make some decisions.
Yeah, and what I would just add, Joni, and I love machine learning. All these new
Mhm.
technologies and methods that are coming up are really good. But then something that I try to build in my teams is that common sense, is that view,
Mhm.
right? Where when you look at something, look at a report or data that may be algorithmically
Right.
absolutely accurate, except it
Mhm.
makes no sense, right?
Right.
So
Right.
I'm sure you face this, where I would get presented with a report, I look at that and I say that just can't be, right? There's just
Right.
no way, because you come at it from your business experience perspective and say
Mhm.
that it just is not in the right ballpark or the right order of magnitude. That's something I'm hoping to build in the teams, so
Mhm.
that even those analysts that are preparing the data, they can question. And I don't want to segue into another topic before
Yeah.
Tim has had a
Yeah.
question, but I would love to talk about the skill sets, right? Some of the
Yeah.
things I
About
look for
talent.
in
Mhm.
talent. So
Right.
we'll get to that next, but
Yeah.
I'm
And
sure Tim has a great view on this as well.
yeah. Yeah. And I think that's important. I think both you and Tim both hit on this important aspect, is that even though you have all this power behind analytics, and we can deal with lots of data and be able to gather insights into it, there's still a human aspect to that is important to it. That those machines don't know, day-to-day life, does that really make sense? And I think that's another aspect, that even with machine learning and artificial intelligence, sometimes you wonder, can a machine make those types of human decisions and distinctions, um, in the future? And so maybe that's a segue, Tim, on what you think the future looks like, related to how we deploy machine learning and artificial intelligence solutions, in our businesses, in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you just hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think the type of technology that is advancing and is available to us is very exciting. When I think about the first 10 plus years of my career, almost everything was done in Excel. I sort of
Yep.
just used Excel to pretty
Mhm.
much do, and it was, I still use Excel a
Yeah.
ton, and it's a perfectly wonderful tool. But there's limitations to it. It's not, when you're analyzing, we sell 3 million tickets a year, 500,000 of those sell on StubHub every year. And then we have 10 plus million people in our database. You can't use Excel to try to sort of analyze that size, that amounts of data. So I think that the two things I would say is, it's very exciting. We're on this journey, and then sorry if I'm naming companies, and I hope they're not conflicting with sponsors, but Google, we're on a Google Cloud. You're partnering with Google to do some stuff in our cloud strategy, and we're going to be doing some things there on the machine learning AI side. And we're really excited about what that's going to do in terms of both the efficiency of the things we want to do, the processing speed of the sort of analysis that we want to run, and the machine learning part. When you recognize its limitations, can
Mhm.
be very valuable. So again, it can't be the only source, but
Right.
we have analysts historically running manual tasks that sort of refresh every day manually. But if you can do that in an automated way, you can.
Mhm.
If you still need the people to teach it, right? The computers need to be taught. So I think it's important that you have those skilled analysts that sort of help you use the tools properly, so that the human element is still incredibly critical. But it is
Right.
exciting for me to think about all that we can do, the sort of new frontiers we can cover with the use of this technology as it's advancing so fast. And again, in the right hands, with the right thoughtful balance, with everything Sass said, I see the future as more data, more analysis, more, use of technology to make things run faster. but never forgetting about the need to sit in a room with your CEO and ask yourself the exact question: does this make sense? You know,
Right.
because sometimes it doesn't, and computers can get things wrong, and you know,
Right.
they are useful to a point. But anyway, so I think that you know is probably the way I see the future unfolding. I'm really excited about a lot of, you know, what's ahead of us. The analysts that I'm hiring, it's funny, you know, I joke around, I'm the old guy, you know, I'm 42 years old, but I'm the old guy that can't do all these wizard things that
Yeah.
they can do with, you know, SQL and all these other things, and Python and things that I have no idea how to do. And my job is to sort of set the strategy and set the course and allow them to work their magic. And it's exciting to see them, what they're capable of doing in this world with all this technology.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I want to talk about talent next, but let's take this next poll question. Does your company use any sort of real-time business, business intelligence reporting software to report KPIs to management? And the results of the poll, 46% yes, and 54% no. So again, I do think that we're going to continue to see that yes percentage increase as more and more companies, you know, deploy these types of solutions as part of their day-to-day business. So let's talk about talent. I think this is an important area because I work in tax technology, and looking to find those resources that can embrace and, you know, like you said, Tim, understand Python and R and all of these, you know, other great tools out there coming in the door. So Sass, let's start with you. From a talent perspective, I mean, what are you looking for, and what are you seeing in the market in terms of the type of talent that you bring in and try to retain as part of your business?
Absolutely, great question. I mean, this is an area that I'm really passionate about, and I think what really makes the difference is talent. I know some of these things are cliche, but I also think very strongly about hiring for attitude than skills, because just think about the last 5 years or 10 years, you know, how much technology have changed, right? What tools were really hot at one point, they aren't anymore, right? So so I tend to look for folks that can think independently, right? That who question the status quo, who can actually who are very resourceful, right? Because in many cases, if we had all the right data, a machine could tell us what to do, except we don't, right? So that's where judgment comes in, and that's where resourcefulness comes in, right? To say, yes, you know, these are the 5 data elements we would need to come up with the decision, except we just have 3. But here is how we will leverage the 3 to still get to a, you know, 90-10 answer, right answer. So those are some of the skill sets I'm looking for. And you know, if Tim is you know, all thinks he's old, I'm older. So you know, but I'm incredibly excited about the you know, millennials and Gen Z, right? Because what I really like about them is you know, I started my career where for the first 3 months I photocopied stuff, right? Because you are the bottom of the rung, right? They're like, hey, here's a bunch of reports, go photocopy, and I photocopied. Because that's how you kind of, you know, earn your stripes to get to the next level, right? Except if you gave it to, you know, my Gen Z daughter, she would figure out a way not to do it, but still get it done, right? It's not like, it's like, I'm not going to go through. So that's what I find incredibly exciting is with the new generation workforce, how resourceful, how innovative they are, right? To be able to leverage the internet, to leverage, there's just so much content out there, right? There's just knowledge. I mean, think about it, right? I at times think about it. I talked to my daughter about this. I said, you know, when I was growing up, I had to go to the library or get a book to learn something, or call someone, right? Or have a teacher. You just have to go to the internet, and there's infinite amount of knowledge. So that's where I'm really excited. And I think, you know, my teams increasingly we're looking for people that are curious, right? That are resourceful, that are curious, that are slightly different. They may not necessarily all have, the degrees and the specific experience, and and I'm an SAP expert or I'm a machine learning expert, because guess what? I mean, we deployed machine learning. The people that were the most resourceful on that weren't the technology folks. They were the folks that actually had the subjective knowledge, right? Where they said, oh, no, let me split it here, right? This is what's going on in my head. When I look at a number, this is what I really look for, right? Which was not apparent to the machine. So anyway, I could go on and on about this, but I'm incredibly excited, and I think analytics is an area where talent makes all the difference, right? The tools, I absolutely agree with Tim. What we had to do, I used to call it hunting and gathering, right? I mean, how much time did we spend on hunting and gathering for data? And many of the new tools help us get it more easily, but that gives us an opportunity to actually use our intelligence, right? Use our judgment to come up with better outcomes.
Right, and I think both of you have hit on that, and that the tools help us gather the information. They give us some efficiencies. You can use, RPA or robotics or something for those repetitive tasks, but it still takes the human element to ask those questions. Is this right? Does this make sense, right? Tim, how about you on talent? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to sound repetitive, but I'll try to say it a different way. There's certain things when we look to hire a new analyst that are just table stakes. We have to be confident that they have the intellectual skills, the background, the knowledge. It's helpful to know Python and SQL and all those things, because that's kind of table stakes. And I think being a team player and being a hard worker and working well in teams, and that's all table stakes. So I think those are just kind of defined. The thing that I think separates the stars from, the good workers from the great workers is that sort of extra gear of intellectual curiosity. And so what I mean by that is, if I give someone a task, hey, I want you to do this, most people that have the skills can do it. But I think what separates it is them coming to me with an idea, them coming to me with a question that I hadn't asked or I hadn't thought of. That sort of curiosity, that sort of intellectual curiosity, I'll give an anecdotal example of when I was an intern this summer, just to make the point. My very first sort of couple weeks on the job, I noticed as I walked around Fenway Park that there were much longer lines at certain gates. We have 5 different gates, and there was like 10 turnstiles at one gate and 5 at the other 3. And it was just very obvious to me that there was just much longer crowds. So I went and I asked who has the turnstile data, and I went and gathered the data, and I did a bunch of analysis, and it turned out that just the way the fan flow worked, it was just much more heavier at this place, and the recommendation was to move the turnstiles from certain underutilized gates to the other one, and it didn't seem to make sense, because I said, oh, you only need 2 turnstiles there. Like, what do you mean 2? Like, that seems crazy. Trust me, you don't need more than 2. You need 17 over here. You're like, 17? But the point is, nobody had really even asked the question. They just sort of observed it without bringing it up as a potential thing we could make better. Because in theory, if you have an equal distribution of turnstile to match the fans, it should be a more even, flow into the game, and it should lower lines overall. So I think that the point is asking that question, being the person that walks around and identifies that opportunity to make something better is the part that I think is this thing that sets apart, great people from good ones. Then you can do the work, and all that's important too. But asking the questions, being innovative, being intellectually curiosity, I think that's all really the critical part.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely agree. So I think we want to be able to let our participants today, ask some questions of you guys. But I thought I'd just kind of ask one last question about, what would your recommendations be for those companies who haven't deployed some type of analytics strategy? What's a good starting point for investigating and actually, trying to push that out?
I'm happy to start if you want, Sass. Sure.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to what I said earlier, which is if you can identify a challenge that you think can be solved by using data, and you can sort of prove to a key decision maker that, you know, so I'll show one last slide if you bear with me, because
Sure.
I think it's worth, you know, this concept of these, sorry, like these heat maps that we created. So when we were doing ticket pricing, I'm sorry, I have to go back here, sorry, to here, you know, when we were doing ticket pricing at a sports team it used to be very inefficient. You had these sections that were different colors and they were all the same price, right? So there was sort of not a lot of thought around that. And we started to create these sort of heat maps, right? So we started to look at the data, creating heat maps that basically showed which sections were overpriced or which sections were underpriced. And in this map, the green sections were sort of selling for higher than their face value. It helped, but then we even advanced on it, and then we sort of improved upon it even more. And we created these maps that showed, you know, very down to the seat level, down to the row level. But I think the visual is what I want to highlight, which is basically the challenge was, how do we make our ticket pricing better? That was sort of the question, right? You have to identify that question. The hypothesis was, well, we have all this data, we can show, you know, we can identify where we're inefficient in our pricing. And then the visual was the key part, because once we put this map in front of our CEO, you know, they were like, oh my God, like, that's so great. Like, it's so obvious which section should be, you know, higher or lower priced. And I think that the point is that for somebody who isn't quite on the journey yet, or is trying to get buy-in from above, step one is identify a challenge that you think can be helped with data. Step two is identify that data, do the work. Step three is present something that you can get sort of a very positive reaction from. Oh, wow, that's really interesting. And then the more you can do that, it doesn't happen overnight. So I think, you know, what's important is it's a process. And, you know, I started this back in 2003, and we are now an organization that embraces this, but it didn't happen overnight. So anyway, sorry, long-winded answer of saying, identify the challenge, find the data, proof of concept that then allows you to get sort of buy-in and more resources.
Great. That's great insight. I'm going to share the results of our last poll. Moving forward, how much do you expect your company to invest in business intelligence and data analytics? And we have significant, about 30%, moderate, 50%, and limited or no investment, both 11%. So that's kind of in line with what I would expect. And so, Sass, I'll let you kind of close out and maybe give your opinion. Similarly, and any advice that you'd like to give the audience about, you know, looking to move into this area if they haven't already invested resources in this direction.
Sure, happy to. I think there's a question for Tim. Tim, there was a question that what was the year-over-year revenue increase for Red Sox using that data?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to isolate sort of, you know, there's so many other factors, right? Team performance goes up and down, you know, there's so many other factors that drive revenue. So I think it's hard to isolate, did data increase revenue by 2% or 5%? I think in the area of ticket pricing, we're very confident that, you know, we've been able to sort of efficiently price our tickets much better, much sort of maximize the sort of price relative to demand, which ultimately drives revenue with the use of data. And the other small example I'll give is we actually did this campaign, season ticket holder campaign, where we sent a postcard out, sort of $25,000 marketing campaign, but it was a very targeted postcard. We were using that customer data warehouse, and within a month, it had generated over $1 million of new season ticket sales. You know, sort of this sort of massive ROI of $1 million revenue on a $25,000 investment. And so I think we know it's working. It's hard to isolate exactly what the impact is, but we know that it's working and driving a business success. You know, and we have a lot of examples of that.
Great. And Sass, since we have another question that, Tim, since you're kind of answering that, we have one other question. How does AI and machine learning consider human behavior responding to a pandemic now and in future seasons when people may be more apprehensive?
You know, the truth is it doesn't. I mean, I think that's some of the limitations of AI, and that's like the Mukherjee example. And I think it's hard to feed the computer a quantitative, you know, thing to apply to ticket demand that is the result of the pandemic so one of the reasons why AI very much has its limitations, and you have to be aware of them, is I think it doesn't, is the answer. You know, I don't think that AI and machine learning can predict nobody knows what the impact on ticket demand for sports teams is going to be as a result of this pandemic. Even after there's a widespread vaccine, it's not clear to us that fans will be comfortable coming roaring back right away. Right. You know, it might take time, and the economy is still going to be recovering. So I think that, you know, one of the challenges we face in predicting our future in 2021 and 2022 is exactly what that bounce back is going to look like. I mean, we're confident that Red Sox fans are passionate and are, want to come back to Fenway when it's safe to come back. But a computer is not going to be able to predict what that demand is. And I think that goes back to just that, making sure you don't, put all those eggs in one basket.
Right. Yep. Sass, do you want to give your thoughts that you started out on, and then we'll open it up for if there's any additional questions out there?
Sure. Just one, additional point on machine learning or automation, in general is before you use any of those, you have to really examine the current process. So, I mean, one of the again, anecdotal, experience is if you have a manual process or a report that makes one error a day, and you automate and use a machine to do it, it could be making an error a minute, right? So you want to machine enable processes that are robust and accurate. But just going back to a point about getting started, I have unfortunately seen a lot of analytics projects that are trying to answer questions that in the big scheme of things don't matter in the company. So I would almost start the other way, and I've done this in many organizations, where you'd be deluged with reports and analytics and all of these things, and you keep asking the question, so what, right? So okay, I know this, so how is this going to help me? How does this help the company? Okay, extremely sophisticated analytics, right? But how does that help the company ultimately, right? So this is where I tend to go back to very basic, simple questions. How does the company make money? What are our strategic goals? Which dial needs to move where, right? And make those succinct, and a short number of ones, and which is how usually it is. It may be the CEO's goals or the board's goals or your investor goals for you, whatever they are. And then I would take those and say, oh, okay, we have to double revenue. Okay, so let's figure out how we were going to do that, right? And what are the drivers for doing that? And then you run projects that help you figure out those answers. So that way, I think, what you do is you're not necessarily boiling the ocean, or you're not trying to, go after a shiny object that doesn't necessarily impact the company in a positive way at the end of the day. That's what I would suggest is go back to basics, try to answer questions that have meaning for the company.
Great. Well, thanks. I think that you both have provided a lot of great insight into this up and coming and continuing to develop area. I hope the audience found this helpful and insightful. I don't know. I don't see any other questions presented in the Q&A or in the chat. So again, thanks everybody for attending. I'm going to pass it back over to John.